Welcome to the On List, another viewer request episode. I decided to knock some of these out because you guys want to see them, and if it results in me having more episodes than I normally do in a given week, then keep the requests coming and I'll keep making the episodes. So we might get back up to 3 a week like we used to have in the old days, or 3 a week for a couple of weeks until the requests run out, and then I'll drop back down to 2 again. Because if left to my own devices to make up my own content, sometimes it dribbles down to 1 a week. Just depends on what I can think of. So you guys think of stuff you want me to talk about, and I'll talk about it. That's how this works. So this episode, my favorite perfumers. So that's an interesting one because I would never think of doing a video specifically on my favorite perfumers, right? It just doesn't really dawn upon me to do that. I mean, I don't know if it's just, I'm going to move this camera back a tiny bit there so I don't have to peek down so hard at you guys. Yeah, there we go. That's a lot better. I wasn't like trying to do this, you know? So, in any case, my favorite perfumers, well, whenever anyone asks me to do my favorite anything, I have a hard time making a list. The whole point of this Unlist channel is that I don't like doing lists. I have a hard time with lists. But I can group a random amount of things together and like make a ball out of it and throw it at you. And that's what I do with this channel. I'm like, okay, floral fragrances, okay. Whatever, just put together in a ball and go, there it is, yours now. So I'm just going to do that with perfumers. My favorite perfumers, no set number, no set order, just names that appeared on top of my head that I happen to like and my reason for liking them. This won't stop me from doing my perfumer series of videos I was doing for a little while where I talk about a perfumer and their creations. I'll still do those. I haven't been doing those for a while though, but I'll still keep doing those eventually. This is just literally the request of my favorite perfumers and why. So I'm just going with the flow, guys. I'm giving you what you asked for. So I'd say, you know, one of the top perfumers that comes to my mind for me personally is going to be Pierre Bordon. And Pierre Bordon, he was underappreciated when he was active. He's still active sometimes. He's been retired for a number of years now. He actually retired in the late 2000s, so he's almost been retired for 20 years. His last major brief he accepted was 2008, and I believe that was Lacoste Challenge, a fragrance I had to actually end up getting rid of because I didn't like it. Sorry, even my favorite perfumers produce duds once in a while, and I wasn't a fan of Challenge. I understand what he was trying to do with it, but you know, it was one of everything he does, which is one of the reasons why I like him. Everything he does explores the possibilities of novel materials. And I don't mean like catchphrase materials like Akigala wood or whatever. I mean just new materials that are created that tend to, at first, not really be utilized by much of the perfume industry. Or if they are utilized, they're utilized with a heavy-handed method, like how, for example, Akigala wood gets abused, like how Isoe Super gets abused, like how things such as Ivernal get abused and beat up on, various woody amber materials like Norlimbanol and such, and Amber Max and all of those things get really heavily abused in perfume. Ethyl maltol gets abused. He takes a different approach. He takes these novel materials and tries to integrate them into a composition so that the best qualities of those materials shine, while the downsides to those materials are subdued. He tries to take the novel materials and find the best possible use for them, instead of just pile driving you with them like this. And that is a knack that he picked up from his teacher, one Edmond Roudnitska, who will also be in this video later on. But Edmond Roudnitska was another person who loved playing with novel materials and loved taking those novel materials and trying to find truly creative ways to integrate them into a composition. Roudnitska was playing with Kalone or watermelon ketone way back in the 50s and 60s when it was first produced. He was playing with jasmine hedione in the 60s before anyone else really played with that material. He has always been like someone who tries to really take materials, whether natural or synthetic. He was a big user of hydroxy citronellol way back in the day, okay, when he made various fragrances that featured a lily of the valley note very prominently. Difficult to produce naturally, right? Expensive. So this carried over to Pierre Bordon, and the reason why I mentioned Pierre Bordon before I mentioned Roudnitska is just Roudnitska would use a lot of these materials, but he didn't make very many perfumes. So he has very prominent instances of these materials being used, but he would never do any variations on that theme. Once he dropped his Diorella, once he dropped his Eau Sauvage, right, that was it. He moved on. So the difference is Bordon would keep playing and playing and playing and playing. So the initial composition that yielded Green Irish Tweed, for example, would later on yield Cool Water. Okay. Likewise, he would start playing around with Kalone materials, and he would manifest several fresh fragrances over the course of his career that prominently featured the material. Everything from Creed fragrances such as Millésime Impérial, all the way up through really odd tea-focused fragrances like Thé Brun Collection Homme by Jean-Charles Perceau. So he just did a lot of really strange things, and he would also put materials in the most unorthodox places. So Pierre Bordon made an unlikely gourmand fragrance called Dolce Vita in the 90s for Dior. Wasn't a huge seller, unfortunately, but it was a very different, interesting gourmand that you're not likely to see again, right? And then likewise, he did a fougere for the House of Grey, Parfum Grey, called Cabaret de Grey Homme. Again, didn't sell well. Most of his stuff was never appreciated at the time of release, which is why I say he's a very underappreciated guy. But Cabaret actually had a pineapple note in it, allyl amyl glycolate. Those of you who know your materials know that allyl amyl glycolate would later go on to become a key proponent for Aventus, a fragrance that allegedly he began working on years before but abandoned. Parts of it would turn up in Full Choke by Francesco Smalto. Parts of it would turn up in the Cabaret de Grey Homme I mentioned. But the overall concept was abandoned. But his student, because Pierre Bordon had his own students, his student, Jean-Christophe Hérault, would pick up that formula and continue to play with it and evolve it into Aventus, which is what we got in 2010. And you all know how mind-blowing Aventus is, or was for some people. So you think about Aventus, Millésime Impérial, Green Irish Tweed, all these big, banging Creed milestone fragrances, they were all either directly composed by or influenced by Pierre Bordon in some way. Yoke Homme, okay, with its big, sweet orange blossom, raspberry accord. Later on, Mont Blanc Individuel, he would create that fragrance as well, like a continuation of that theme, a refinement. Then we would get Original Santal, which would be sort of like the expensive version based on one of the mods from that brief. So my point is there's all this perfume out there. And all this perfume has greatly influenced the direction of modern perfumery as we know it. And all of it is either created by or in relation to Pierre Bordon, and he just doesn't get the credit like he should. And people every day are still wearing Millésime Impérial, every day still wearing Cool Water, every day still wearing derivatives of Aventus. And then Kouros, right? Kouros. Such a big deal of a fragrance that was. No one had made anything like that before, and arguably no one has really made anything like that since. I mean, you can say that Rien by Etat Libre d'Orange is very similar to that, okay? that's kind of inspired loosely by Koros, but nothing has really come out since Koros that is on that level. That soapy combination of the animalic musk, and that fragrance kind of defined the 80s for a lot of people. So once again, very underrated perfumer. He is, if he's not the top of a official list, because I don't really do lists, right? If I was going to make a list, he'd probably be at the top of it, right? But he's definitely in that crown jewel section. He's in that top shelf, right? He's where I keep the Crown Royal and where I keep the Bombay Sapphire, and stuff like that. So it's where I keep the top shelf stuff. Another perfumer of a similar stripe who is very creative, who I don't think really gets enough credit, is going to be Jean-Claude Ellena, and another student of Roudnitska, honestly. But Ellena goes in a different direction than Bordon. Bordon likes to make fragrances that are very avant-garde, very dynamic, okay? Sour, fruity, burst, fresh, musky, things like that. Ellena was more of like light through a stained glass window. He took the aspects of his teachings from Edmond Roudnitska in a different direction, and he cut away a lot of the heavy musks. He cut away a lot of the more opaque materials, so heavy tonka doses, any kind of resinous balsamic notes that sometimes lingered in Roudnitska's own work too, right? Like Moustache is generally a very, very heavy, sour, musky fragrance, and Ellena would just strip all those things away. Like, he basically delivered the cold, clean-cut, sheer version of Eau de Hermes, which was a Roudnitska composition. He delivered like the clear, cold version of that with Declaration by Cartier, released way back in '98. And then even his early work, like Essence Rare for Houbigant, Rochas Globe in 1990 with Nicolas Mamounis. Even his early work sort of tells of this direction in the future that he would take his fragrances, where he would just make a very, like I said, light coming through stained glass. And I know that a lot of people pick on that the same way they pick on, say, Quentin Bish's work, because all of that seems very singular in design too. But you have to understand that a perfumer, like any artist, is going to find the one thing they're really good at doing, and they're going to lean into it. If you don't like that one thing, then you're not going to like that perfumer's body of work, and that's understandable. Once Jean-Claude Ellena found his thing, that's what he worked on. And he continued to work on it, particularly through Hermes. And a lot of people these days are big fanboys and fangirls of Hermes because of Elena's work. It's no secret that Hermes kind of was losing its sense of direction into the 90s, because all of their earlier fragrances, stuff like Kalash, stuff like Amazon, stuff like Equipage, these were all very conservative, conventional, staid, sort of old money, stealth wealth type fragrances. Fragrances meant to not stand out. Fragrances meant to be for the if you know, you know, right? That's the kind of crowd that wore Hermes fragrances in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Bellamy, same thing, okay? So Rouge de Hermes, same thing. Just very sort of old school. Some would say stodgy, some would say conservative. It's fine. I like all those fragrances. I like Equipage. I like Amazon. I like Kalash. But the fact stands, a lot of them were not bleeding edge fragrances. And they also weren't particularly focused on trends either or hype. They were just, we're taking a well-worn groove and we're staying in that groove. And we're just going to refine it further. And that's okay. There's an audience for that. At least there was an audience for that. I don't know about now, but there was an audience for that back then. That well began to run dry. Things like Harris and things like Rockabar not doing so great. So here comes Jean-Claude Ellena, and he basically puts this massive, futuristic, transparent, ethereal spin on their entire catalog, starting with the Jardin series, right? His big thing was the Jardin Serligny, right? He came in with Jardin Serligny, and then he started doing Terre de Hermes after that, and just followed up, okay, with fragrances on the men's side and women's side. So, and then the unisex stuff, and then the Hermescence range. So, and even fragrances like Epice Marine and such, and Amber Nargol, they're just uh, very crystalline. Like I said, they have this transparency to them, and they don't hit you in the air. They're just kind of floating around you, and they just become like an essence. Not to sound silly, but they come on like an essence, and you catch little bits of that essence here and there. And honestly, a lot of people who do a lot of smoking or have a lot of pets or chronic oversprayers, they're the ones who always complain, you know, and they blame the fragrance, but it's really them that's at fault. You know, I don't want to be the victim shamer kind of person here, but I'm like, if you're putting on 15 sprays of Terre de Hermes, that's the problem. That's why you can't smell it. It's not the fragrance. It's the fact that you're putting on 15 sprays of it. You know, you got 3 dogs that you don't clean up after. You're a 2-pack-a-day chain smoker. You work on a farm with horse manure all day. Whatever your deal is, that's the reason why you can't smell your perfume. It's not the perfume's fault. Because I have never had a problem smelling anything that Jean-Claude Ellena has made over the years. Some things may definitely not be beast mode, right? They may not be super strong, but I can smell them. I can always detect them on my skin or in the air around me. I've never had an issue with that. So, another perfumer that I greatly appreciate, obviously, Edmond Roudnitska, the teacher of these two, Pierre Bordon and Jean-Claude Ellena. This whole video is going to feel like a love letter to Roudnitska and his students, but it's kind of true. You know, the three of them are like the Triforce, if you're going to quote Zelda, of like modern perfumery. Without the three of them, a lot of stuff we take for granted now wouldn't exist. So, and Elena's whole thing being different from Pierre Bordon's whole thing just shows that Roudnitska, even though he had a certain way of doing things, he was able to impart his knowledge without influencing necessarily the style of the perfumers he was teaching. Yeah, there are a lot of things that Ellena has done which feel like love letters to his teacher, and a couple things Bordon has done that also feel like love letters to his teacher, but neither of them have based their entire works on Roudnitska's style alone. They've done their own, they've gone in their own directions. And Roudnitska's work just kind of speaks for itself. I mean, Eau de Hermes, like I said, don't have much I can really add to that conversation. Moustache de Rochas, both the regular and the concentré, same thing. Eau Sauvage, Diorella, Dior, you know, it's just not much I can say there. So it's sort of cut and dried. So yeah, and there's some stuff that he did later on that doesn't get talked about as much, like the Mario Valentino Ocean Rain from 1990, his last fragrance before his death, unless you want to count Parfum de Therese, which was already pre-existing as a bespoke fragrance, originally called The Plum. That is technically the first fragrance to ever feature cologne that he ever made, but because it wasn't sold to the public until after his death, it doesn't really count so much. But still, it's a very groundbreaking perfume. And it's funny, it was so groundbreaking that people didn't understand it. It's just like the whole thing with Back to the Future of, oh, hey, you don't like this, but your kids are going to love it. Your grandkids are going to love it. That's kind of what it was with the Plum, which became Parfum de Therese. All the ideas that were found in the Plum were ideas that would become more common in perfumery 20, 30, 40 years later. That fragrance was like almost a half century ahead of the curve. So, bizarre sci-fi stuff there. And, you know, then we're moving on. Harry Fremont. I love Harry Fremont's work. I have the privilege of being able to talk to him a little bit. I haven't spoken to him in a while, though, because I'm not really on Instagram all that much anymore. And I don't think he has any other means of contact besides Instagram. But if you're watching this, Harry, just saying hi to you. But love his work. Unfortunately, a lot of his work, too, kind of falls on deaf ears these days, and a lot of it got discontinued. So some of his best fragrances are fragrances that you can't even buy anymore. I mean, yeah, they're the big ones that everyone knows. I mean, stuff like CK1, where he was paired up with Alberto Morillas. created a groundbreaking white musk jasmine tea fragrance that would kind of set the pace for unisex fragrances for decades after. But a lot of my favorite Harry Fremont fragrances are the deep cuts, not the ones that you know about. So not Polo Sport, okay, and stuff like that, okay? The ones everyone knows. Like, the stuff from him that I like the most are the deep cuts. I mean, yeah, Kenneth Cole Black was a big deal too, but just like stuff from him, like, for example, you know, Michael Fremont, the original one from 2002. Such a strange, cool fragrance that was. Sour leather notes, tobacco notes, this kind of like slightly sort of not rotted exactly, but like very overripe kind of plum thing going on in there, mixed with the tobacco and the sour leather. It's just nothing smells like that. Nothing in the world smells like Michael Fremont. And it's very, very, very good stuff. And then, of course, Purple Label, 2003 by Ralph Lauren. Super exclusive. Not a lot of people got to smell the fragrance because it was only sold in the Ralph Lauren boutiques. But if you get your hands on it, and now it's a little easier to come by because Ralph Lauren sells it in department stores, certain ones like Nordstrom. I don't know about Macy's, but you can definitely get it in Nordstrom. But the Purple Label has this kind of just dry suede kind of leather thing with the black currant on top. And it does a little bit of this fresh sort of slightly smoky, leathery thing. It's so minimal, but also memorable. And it's a fragrance people complain about that's not very powerful, but you have to understand it's not meant to be super strong, because the idea is it was for their top end suit line, the Purple Label suit line. So it's meant to be discreet and gentlemanly to begin with, but like in a modern sense, not in an old-fashioned lavender fougere kind of way like you'd expect someone in a business suit to be more like wearing something from a barber shop. But so it's more like the modern by way of 2003. But a lot of people say that it was a fragrance that inspired the creation of Aventus. And I can sort of see that a little bit. And I've made such insinuations myself in the past. But regardless, it's one of the more unheralded fragrances that Harry Fremont did. And another one that I like a lot, besides Michael for Men and that one, is the original Aramis New West for Men, the men's version of that. And that particular fragrance, let me tell you what, that particular fragrance, a lot of people want to hate on that because it's got the big honeydew melon note, the big Kalo note in it. I guess a kind of a nod sort of to Roudnitska in a sense, but it's got this lovely herbal garrigue sort of chypre base that's under that melon. So once you get through the melon, you get to that herbal green side of it, and it's unexpected, and it just smells really good, and it's such a good alternative to a typical aquatic, to a typical blue fragrance. And it's another one that people just don't want to talk about, and sadly Aramis has discontinued the entire range, so New West is also discontinued. So if it costs you a ton of money to get your hands on, don't bother. You can just get other things that are similar. But nothing's going to be quite the same as that. And I have a friend, JB Oren, who's super into New West, and I'm sure he could give you a speech about it. I'm not going to do that. But, and then another perfumer, and I'm going to wrap this up, Christine Nagel. Christine Nagel doesn't get enough love. She deserves her own video. But she's done a lot of really interesting, good perfumes. And not just stuff with Hermes. I love her Hermes output. But, I mean, she was doing Giacomo Paradox from 1999, 2000. The blue bottle that's flat. The flat blue Giacomo Paradox bottle. That has such an interesting, like, papaya kumquat thing going on with that. It doesn't smell anything like you would expect a blue bottle to smell like, and it doesn't smell anything like what anyone else was doing at that era either. It's just really, it's in a world unto itself. Very musky too. musky, fruity, sort of aromatic fragrance. And it's just very, very strange and cool. And then, of course, the Eau de Cartier range from 2001, 2002, Eau de Cartier, and my favorite, Eau de Cartier Concentré, which to me is like the best merger of lavender and violet I think I've ever smelled. Just lavender, violet, cistery, hexanol, grassy notes, vetiver, crisp, green, smooth, fresh. Man, it doesn't get much better than that, and unfortunately it's discontinued as well, so good luck getting your hands on it. Fast forward, we've got Homage L'Homme by Lalique from 2004, 5? But it's another violet fragrance. This time it's like more of a Parma violet, so it's more of a candy floral violet mixed with a thin veneer of some kind of synthetic oud compound. And again, it's just this very strange, unique fragrance. And I think Christine Nagel was with Veronique Nyberg together on this fragrance. So she wasn't a single perfumer here. She was part of a team. But again, it's just a very strange, weird, cool. And all of this happened before she was picked up by Hermes. So that's what I'm saying, man. And then when she got picked up by Hermes, and of course Christine Nagel has done stuff for Guerlain too. She has Guerlain fragrances under her belt. So, you know, the girl has done some good stuff, and y'all just want to trash her because she's not Jean-Claude Ellena. So shame on you, you know. But her Hermes stuff is also very, very different and cool. You know, the vetiver fragrance she made for the Terre de Hermes range, one of my favorite vetiver fragrances of all time. So, and you know, Paddock, which is not one that you can find really, but she created Paddock as well. And I haven't smelled that one yet, but everyone says it's kind of like the horse's ass. So people just, you know, they get this sort of weird butthurt view of Hermes because they're not getting original Terre de Hermes anymore, and they're not getting like that Ellena style anymore. And I'm like, come on, man. The dude didn't get fired. He left. So he was done. So you got to move on. And her stuff is very creative. I understand not everyone liking H24. I understand not everyone liking Barania. I like Barania, though. I think Barania is very good, but I understand you're not liking it. But Gallo de Hermes was fantastic. Rose leather composition. Barania was also kind of good in my opinion, too. Like I said, I like it. She's just very creative, and within the confines of the designer space, because Hermes is designer these days, within the confines of the designer space, that's hard. It is so difficult to be creative in that space because everyone wants another Invictus. Everyone wants another Good Girl. Everyone wants another Delina. Everyone wants another, Sauvage. Everyone wants another, just that kind of garbage, bubblegum, shower gel, fruity, Fruit Loops, Powerpuff Girls, Jim Bro. That's all anybody wants in the designer space. So it is very difficult to be creative in that space. So you got to give her props. And other perfumers who I'm not going to have time to mention in this video, favorite perfumers, but I'll just name drop them real quick, is Michael Amirac. He's done so much good stuff. Obviously the big one for me is, Davidoff. He's done that one. Also another one I'm going to name drop is Pierre Bordon. He's done some stuff I like too. Obviously Dracar Noir. Jacques Cavalier. Now it's Cavalier Belletrude. Before he was with Louis Vuitton, right? He did some really good stuff too. L'Eau d'Issy Poron. He was one of the perfumers on the original Aqua de Jo. He also has done a lot of great stuff for YSL. He did the Jazz Prestige, and he did Opium Pour Homme. He's one of the perfumers on Rive Gauche Pour Homme. Do I need to go on? Do I need to continue? Also, Ron Winograd has done a lot of great stuff in the 70s and 80s that I love. Roger Pellegrino is another one. So without those guys, there wouldn't be stuff like One Man Show and Yadigan. And Vincent Marcello is another one. You know, Guy Robert is another one. But a lot of those guys, even though I love their stuff, it was very conventional for the time. So Bernard Chant, same thing, very conventional for the time. They had stylistic quirks about them that made them cool, and personality quirks, and their perfumes all have personality. But they weren't really pushing the envelope the way the people I spent length talking about have, right? So again, Ron Winograd, Guy Robert, Vincent Marcello, Carlos Benem, all those people, really good perfumers, and they have really good bodies of work to their name, but they were just staying in their lane for the most part with their creations. Roger Pellegrino had a big thing for green leather, so a lot of his stuff is green leather. Vincent Marcello, obviously the same way, and you know, it just, there's certain things here or there that stand out from their catalogs, but a lot of their stuff, again, tracks with the time period. It doesn't stand out as much as you might want it to, you know, not like some other things. And of course, historical nods to Germaine Cellier, historical nods to Jean Carles, historical nods to Vincent Roubert, Andre Fraisse. They're just not my favorites, you know. Me personally, I could name drop all these old dead perfumers all day, you know, going all the way back to the 19th century with Paul Parquet if I wanted to, right? I could do that. I could be that guy, but I'm not being that guy because as much as I respect their work for its historic significance and how good it smells, Jacques Guerlain's another one. I respect his work too. I respect Guerlain. I respect everything he's done, but those fragrances didn't impact me as much, personally. Didn't impact me as much as stuff by Jean-Claude Ellena, Pierre Bordon, Christine Nagel, Edmond Roudnitska. Those folks definitely are more in my vibe. So there you go. My favorite perfumers, subject to change. This has been the On List. I'll catch you later.